There we go. Okay. All right. Morning, folks. Welcome. We're all set up here for a neat program today. And you can see we're still hanging out in the Ice Age. I wanted to untangle some stuff here real quick and give a little preview of next week's program. We're going to be talking about some really neat things next week as well. Today's program is ancient music. We're going to have a lot of fun. By the end of the program today, you're going to learn how to make and use a couple of different Stone Age musical instruments. Some really neat stuff. Next week's program is a little bit more compact. Most of it actually fits in this bag here. We're going to be talking about ancient fishing. Now, believe it or not, fish and seafood have been a part of the human diet for a long time. We're going to be looking at some harpoons, fish spears, and even some prehistoric fish hooks. It's going to be a lot of fun. I don't actually have a currently existing species of fish here in the museum to catch, but maybe we'll see if we can cast a line out and reel in a Zophanctinus or an Ichthyosaur, something a little bit more ancient. It'll be a lot of fun. Now, I hear my little reminder alarm going here. Yep. All right. So it is 1 o'clock. That means we'll put our fishing tackle away and get going with today's program. So there we go. Make sure, never want to spill your tackle box, right? Now, there we go. Today's program is ancient music. First thing, I want to thank everybody for joining me here at Colossal Fossils today. If this is your first program with us, my name is Sean. I am the experimental archaeologist here at the Colossal Fossils Museum in Wausau. What that means is that I spend most of my time making reproductions of artifacts, be it tools or clothing or equipment, fire starting, that sort of thing. And I take it out of it and I use it. Yeah. Stuff like my little stone knife here, or not so little stone knife. I actually take this out and I use it for whatever I'd use a pocket knife for. And by doing that, I can study how these tools, how these things that our ancestors used as part of their daily lives worked, how they lasted, how they wore out, why we see certain, say, wear patterns on a stone tool, all kinds of neat things that help us learn more about our ancient ancestors. Now, in previous programs, we've been talking about things like stone tools and making fire. And of course, those are very practical tools, essentially. Those are things that they had practical function. They had purpose that we can very clearly understand and very clearly see. Now, one of the previous programs, we actually talked about cave art, and well, that's a little bit less practical. Now, potentially, you can take art and you can use it as instructions, right? Say like, if any of you like to build Legos, unless they've changed since I was a little tyke. The Legos always had the instructions with pictures of how the blocks go together to build the spaceship or the giant robot or whatever you were building, the pirate ship. And so pictures can be used instructionally. Well, music's a little different. Today, we think of music as being recreational, entertainment, right? Go to a concert or we turn on the radio when we're on a long road trip to keep ourselves occupied. We don't necessarily think of music as being a tool or being a functional aspect of our existence. But in fact, it probably started that way. Now, before we get into that, I want to go over a couple of things. And don't worry, the whole program isn't a lecture. I've got a lot of neat stuff to show you. Just want to give you a little bit of background before we get into it. Music is defined in the dictionary as being sounds of vocal or instrumental origin that are combined in such a way as to produce beauty of form, harmony, or expression of emotion. Well, what does that mean? That basically means that music is noise that's combined in a way that sounds nice, pretty sounds. Now, sound, all sound, whatever it is, whether it's me talking into the microphone and your computer making that sound so that you can hear what I'm saying, or cars driving by outside, or thunder from a thunderstorm, all sound is waves of energy. And those waves of energy, as they move through the atmosphere or water or the ground or walls or whatever they move through, they're actually vibrating the molecules in that structure, in that atmosphere, in that fluid. And that's transferring the waves of energy. So when I speak, the energy of my voice is rattling the atmosphere. And when you hear it, that movement, that rattling through the atmosphere that transfers that energy, moves your eardrum, what we call a tympanic membrane. And that vibration inside your ears is what you sense as the sound. It's what you hear. So sound, of course, is absolutely not a human invention. It's not something limited to us, right? Anytime a cricket chirps or a frog croaks or a bird squeaks and whistles and sings, it's all sound, right? Even something as simple as rocks falling down a hill, it's sound. Well, humans actually, quite a long time ago, took sound and started to kind of direct it, use it on purpose, use it intentionally. Now, we don't know when music was invented. We don't really know why it was invented. We've got a couple ideas that we're going to talk about. About 530,000 years ago, we've got a fossil of what's called a hyoid bone. It's a U-shaped bone in your throat that allows you to speak, which means that our ancestors, pre-human ancestors, had the capacity to sing and to speak. We think that they did, that they were capable of doing that. That also means that our close cousins, the Denisovans and the Neanderthals, their ancestors had that capacity, so we believe they had that capacity, that they could sing, they could produce music. And in fact, some of the instruments we're going to talk about shortly come from Neanderthal sites. So music is not just limited to us. Now, musical instruments get a little bit tricky. The very oldest musical instruments are probably what we call percussion instruments, where you hit things together. The very oldest music is probably as simple as people humming or singing, right? You know, think like you sing happy birthday. Unless your parties are better than mine, you don't have any musical instruments or somebody playing a keyboard or a guitar along with it. It's just everybody having a good time singing happy birthday, right? Well, if we go into a Stone Age site, we go into an archaeological dig and we find something like this, a pair of sticks, we would not recognize this as a musical instrument. We might think it's a tool, a variation of like my digging stick here. And in fact, they could be used for digging up roots and tubers, right? They're sticks. They could be firewood. They could be intended for future knife handles, or they could be the ends that you trimmed off of a spear that was a little longer than you wanted, or whatever, right? They're sticks. But a very ancient musical instrument is called clapsticks. Clapsticks are quite simply sticks that you hit together. They don't have to be fancy, they don't have to be special wood, they're very, very simple. But if you get a couple of people that are clapping while you're singing and dancing, your hands start to get sore. Pick up a couple of sticks and you get a good sound. And it doesn't make your hands go numb after a while from clapping. Now, clapsticks, again, they're an interesting instrument because they allow us to make a different sound, to augment the sound that we can make with just our body. They're very easy to get, they're very easy to make, and we wouldn't recognize them. If we found a 400,000-year-old pair of clapsticks, we wouldn't necessarily think, hey, these are musical instruments. Now, music had a lot of significance for ancient people. Now today, like I mentioned before, music is very much a recreational thing. We get together as a group, we sing around the campfire, brings everybody together. We all have a good time. We listen to music as we travel on road trips and, put it on when we're doing homework as background noise, that sort of thing. It's recreational. But in the past, music had several other uses. One that's still a use today, I suppose, religion. Music was used to talk to the spirit world. It was used to pray. Even in churches today, of course, you have choirs and you sing hymns. There are many places where music was and still is used to pass down oral traditions, stories with morals, things that talk about the past and what people did. Now, in previous eras, in the Middle Ages, for example, knights would often have a bard, somebody who essentially followed them around and told everybody how awesome and how great this knight was. But they would tell these stories of fighting the dragon or what have you to music. They would sing the song of the hero. And that's a tradition that goes very far back. If you know of, say, Achilles or Hercules from Greek legends, they're Bronze Age characters. They go back 3,000-4,000 years. When their stories were told in the Bronze Age, it wasn't somebody sitting down and just talking like I am right now. They would actually sing these poems, these epics, with accompanying music. They would sing the songs of their heroes. And it's that storytelling tradition that goes with music that we think is very, very old. Now, there are a group of peoples in Australia that we call the Aborigines. Actually, it's many, many groups. Australian Aborigine as a term is like Native American as a term. There's many, many tribes of Native Americans. They all have their own differences and their own unique cultures. But something that the Aborigines do that's really, really interesting to our conversation here today is they have a tradition called songlines. Songlines, kind of simplify it a little bit, they have a lot to do with telling history, with explaining and communicating with the spirits and that sort of things. But some of the songlines, some of the songs that they use are actually maps. They use this storytelling process, this sort of oral tradition, to explain to people who have never traveled their countryside, their land, where everything is. And these songlines cross tribal boundaries and are consistent from group to group, tribe to tribe, over massive areas, to the extent that a detailed enough songline gives you a map essentially of the entire continent of Australia. There are traditions of songlines that tell where all of these places are, all the landmarks are, all the water are, where they found food, where they ran into other people from other groups. And these song lines are consistent enough that you can actually map out the continent of Australia. Now, this is a process, a practice that is very, very ancient. And there's a good chance, of course, it's very hard to prove without a time machine, but there's a very good chance that that is part of where music originated. Because if I use a song, if I use music, say my clapsticks here, to explain to you where we go to find another mammoth like Herbie back there, it's easier to remember, to repeat exactly as you heard it as a song. And the clapsticks allow me to add detail. These song lines get so detailed that you can not only tell the lay of the landscape and where the landmarks are, but you can understand the pace that you had to move to get there, how difficult the land was to traverse. So think of it this way now. If we want to go on a mammoth hunt, we want to go find some meat for winter. We are going to go scout the Ice Age landscape. So we're going to come out of our hut next to the mouth of the cave, and it's dawn, so the rising sun is coming up over there. We're going to put the rising sun on our right shoulder, and we're going to start walking. So we leave the village at dawn with the rising sun over our right shoulder, and this is the pace that we're walking. It's kind of a fast walk or a slow jog as we move out over the countryside, over the mammoth steppe, through the tundra, through the grass, following game trails, keeping that sun to our right side, which means we're heading north. We go for a half a day at this pace, and it's a fast pace, right? So we start to get a little bit tired, but we keep moving because the land is open and flat. The snow has pushed the grass down, but it's not too deep to walk through. When we get to midday and that sun is overhead and behind us because it's getting winter, the sun's kind of low in the sky, we stop. And off to our left, with the sun overhead traveling at that pace for a half of a day, we see a hill. A hill's a good place to get a view of the landscape. So we turn to our left and we keep our pace. We go over to that hill. We start to climb the hill, and it's a steep hill, so we have to slow. And when we get to the top of the hill, we stop. From the top of the hill, we can look around and see the landscape. And if we keep the setting sun in front of us, so we're still going left, we're still going west from where we were before. From the top of the hill, we can see water, and around that water are mammoths. So we start heading that way to go and see how many they are and see if we can find one that we want to have the village come and hunt with us. So we start down the hill at a good pace because we see what we're looking for. We get to the bottom of the hill and we go back to our jog. And we jog till the middle of the afternoon. The sun is getting lower in the sky, and we make it to that water, to that river, and we stop. And there we are. The mammoths are there. We've traveled a full day from the village. We've gone up a hill through fields and valleys. We've turned, but we know how fast we had to go to get there in that time. We know the hill was steep and tall. We know we started with the sun on our left. We saw the hill when it was overhead, and it took us another quarter day to get to the water. So for somebody who's never been there before, who's never made that journey, you can now picture that in your head. They actually call that a dream track, because you can imagine yourself going on that journey, going on that scouting trip, even though you weren't there, just by the song and the story. Now, the Ice Age landscape, the mammoth steppe, the mammoth tundra, well, we didn't necessarily have access to sticks like this, not easy access anyway. So our ancestors would have had several options, which again, we wouldn't recognize as musical instruments if we found them in a cave. These are rib bones, unmodified, cleaned up and dried off rib bones from an oxen, a very large cow. And if we found these in a cave, we'd think they're raw materials for tools or leftover barbecue. But they give a really good, sharp clack, a good solid noise. Another thing that we find, flint knapping tools. Now, these are actually my flint knapping tools. I use these to make stone blades, things like this. But if we take these and use them like our clapsticks, get another really good tone. You can even make it a little more complicated. None of these would be recognized as musical instruments. Now, beyond just smacking a couple of things together, musical instruments have developed into a wide range of different types and different styles throughout the Paleolithic and well into the modern world. Of course, nobody during the Stone Age had an electric guitar. But things like these show up in hunter-gatherer cultures and isolated tribal groups all over the world. Rattles are a very popular thing because they make, again, a different kind of music. You got to expand your band a little bit, the Stone Age band with, more than just percussion. And this is just a simple unmodified birdhouse gourd. This is pulled off the plant and dried. You can get seeds for these at hardware stores, garden centers, internet. I'm sure Amazon has them. They grow really well in a slightly warmer climate. I had to actually start mine inside and then plant them outside to give them enough time to grow. But I'm a ways north up here in Wausau. Now, when they dry out, the seeds break loose in there. And actually, the more you use it, the more they kind of break loose and the better sound you get. If you found an item like this in a cave, you'd think it's either raw material for a container. If I cut a hole out of there, I've got a soup spoon or a drinking cup, or you'd think it's food. You might just find a seed in a piece of rind. You'd never know that this was being used as a musical instrument. You would just know that it was something that they collected. If you want to grow those, they do grow very easily. They grow pretty well, but be aware they're a wandering vine, which means they get very large and they spread out. I had mine planted behind my my garage by my hut, and it covered over the back of the garage and climbed 30 feet up into a maple tree. I had to climb a tree to get that gourd. Now, another option that we actually see the Native Americans were using quite a bit, these are deer hooves. And what's interesting about these as an instrument is that you can actually tie clusters of these to your clothing. And if you're doing a dance, say a ceremonial dance or just having a good time along with the music, every time you move with the rhythm, it actually turns your clothing into a musical instrument. And of course, you can put them on a stick or grab a handful of them like this and add your own sound to the band. Rattles, of course, are very easy to make. This particular one is just a coconut shell that's been opened up and has a couple of wooden beads in it. Gives you yet another sound. Now, something that's a little bit more widespread, a little bit more expected amongst our more modern musical options is, of course, the drum. Drums go back a long ways. They're really pretty simple to make with Stone Age tools and technologies. This particular one is just a split of wood taken out of a branch. It was soaked in water and held over a campfire to get it good and hot, and then it was bent carefully into a circular shape, tied that way to dry. When it dried and cooled, it held that shape. And to make this part, what we call the membrane, we take untanned leather, which is called rawhide. It's stiff and almost plasticky texture when it's dried. If you have a dog at home, you give them like the dog bone chew with the knotted ends. That's made of rawhide, actually from a cow usually. This is from white-tailed deer. And well, during the Stone Age, rawhide was basically the plastic of the day, except it doesn't have to be recycled because it's completely biodegradable. You can even eat it, although I wouldn't recommend it. Very chewy, not much nutrition. Now, when that's soaked and saturated with water, it gets a little bit stretchy, a bit flexible. We take it, we stretch it over that frame. We use more rawhide to stitch the two pieces together. It's a little tricky, takes a little bit of time, but once you got it done, you get a really nice sound. And this one's a little on the small side, so it travels very well. It's very light. It's not super durable, but it would absolutely be something that people during the Stone Age could carry with them as they traveled on their mammoth hunts or moved the village from campsite to campsite. It's of course an instrument that survived into the modern world and is used all over. But what's nice about the drum is that unlike our other percussion instruments, we can get different tones from one instrument. That allows us to start moving toward what we actually think of as music. The ability to make more than just a rhythm, just a constant droning sound, but in fact, different sounds from the same instrument. Now, around about 50,000 years ago, somebody came up with a really neat invention. We're not really sure what gave them the idea, where it started, but we start to find whistles. Now this is a ham bone. I actually had this ham for dinner last Christmas. Took the bone, cleaned it out. You can see it's hollow. Carved a little groove on the end here. Let's see if we can get the camera to focus for you. The groove is nothing special. It just has a little bit of a sharp edge down here. And it doesn't have to be all that sharp. Like it doesn't have to be sharp enough to cut anything. The way it works is when an air current passes over that sharp edge, it creates turbulence, which is to say the air shudders. And that vibration resonates through the hollow tube and makes sound. So this one's a little tricky because it's so small, but I'll see if I can get a good sound out of it for you. There we go. Like I said, this one, it's a little on the small side. I didn't realize I needed it to be bigger. This was the first one I made. Now, with this, of course, it's just a single tone. This could be used to signal, to communicate. Of course, if I'm coming back from a hunt and it's camp is in the woods, and people hear the brush rustling around, they get their spears ready, thinking I'm the great bear or a saber-toothed cat trying to sneak up and eat somebody. I can go, and they'll go, oh, it's just a mammoth hunter. And then I don't have to worry about getting a spear thrown at me. But what's neat about this, in the Congo, in Central Africa, there's a group of peoples called the Pygmies. They're called that because they're generally kind of small people, because there's not a lot of resources in the jungle that people can eat. So competition for nutrition is kind of high, so people stay smaller. But they have an interesting musical tradition. They make flutes, usually out of bamboo, that only play one note, a whistle like this. They use them for music by adding to it with their own voice and with some percussion. They take and they create a beat like this, and they alternate. They'll play a note on their little whistle, and then they'll sing a note. I'm not gonna really try this because I have a terrible singing voice, and I apologize to anybody who isn't completely tone deaf, but ha, 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 ha. And of course, they're much, much better at it than I am, but you get the idea. By doing that, they can actually use just a single note whistle to sing. And you get a bunch of them together doing that all as a group, singing the same song. Actually sounds quite impressive. Now moving ahead a little bit in time, some of our Stone Age ancestors got very, very smart, and they started to modify their whistles by adding holes in them. Now this one is made out of a chicken leg. It's a chicken leg bone. It was barbecue. It's delicious. Again, cleaned it out. The leg bones are hollow. So, you know, hot water, put a stick in there, clean it out, and carved a little notch on the top, drilled the holes in, and the holes allow us to change the length of the instrument where that sound has a chance to resonate. It changes the pitch. By doing that, for the first time, we have real discernible different notes from the same instrument. And what's really neat about this is we find these in Homo sapien settlements, in human settlements, but we also have examples made out of auric bone, which is sort of an ancestral wild cow, and even cave bear leg bones, in one case a jawbone, that come from Neanderthal sites. The Neanderthals, of course, we think of them as being very different, but they were actually a lot like us. And it seems that they liked art, jewelry, and music just like our ancestors did. Now this one, because it's bigger, it's a little harder to play. It actually takes a lot of breath, but it has a really good sound. We'll give it a try here. You got to hit just the right spot with just the right amount of air. You get the idea. You know, by about 42,000 years ago, some very smart, very creative, very inventive Homo sapien ancestors of ours started making those whistles out of longer bones. The oldest seem to have been made out of the leg bone, or the wing bones rather, of swans and vultures. Now those are bones about as long as my arm from elbow to wrist, about the same length of a modern flute. That allows more holes. Now this one's made out of a piece of bamboo. It's modeled after a particularly interesting Paleolithic flute that was made out of woolly mammoth tusk. Now, unlike leg bones of cows and bears and wing bones of birds like vultures and swans, woolly mammoth tusk is very dense, very hard, and not hollow. Now that means that somebody, to make a flute like this out of mammoth tusk, had to, of course, first get the mammoth. And I assure you, Herbie back there will not part with his tusks lightly. It's a lot of work to get those. To get the tusk, they're about this big around. So you've got to carve out a strip to the size of the flute that you want, carve that strip to the shape of the flute. Then, with a drill made by gluing a stone, sharp stone to the end of a long stick, you have to drill out the entire length of that strip of ivory. You have to hollow it out without turning your drill too far one way or the other as you go and boring a hole through the side. Then, once you've got that polished, shaped, and hollowed out, you've got to put your finger holes in just the right spot at just the right size. You've got to make your embouchure, which is that sharp notch where the sound is made, to produce your flute. With stone tools out of mammoth ivory will take you more than 220 hours. That's 2 or 3 or 4 hours a night, every night for an entire Ice Age winter. At least as much time as you will all spend doing homework throughout a whole school year. But what's really neat about these flutes, these full-size flutes, for the first time that we're able to confirm, people are using the full musical scale. They're playing all of the same musical notes that we listen to and use in music today. Now you can imagine with a couple of flute players, a couple of drummers, some clapsticks, some rattles, a few singers. By 40,000 years ago, you've got the makings of an entire band. The whole village coming together and singing, celebrating, telling their stories, their song lines, tales of ancestors, heroes, adventures, great hunts. That is 10 times older than the oldest Egyptian pyramids. Now, next on our list of Ice Age musical instruments, because there's more to the Stone Age band, the caveman band, than just the flutes and drums. I want to look at string instruments. Now, this is what we would call a theoretical. Instruments like this exist in the modern world, and actually some very modern versions of them exist in music that we listen to. We think of this as a very, very rudimentary guitar. Now, where this idea came from, where this is based on, is something called a mouth bow. There's a practice in some places of taking a lightweight small bow like this, you rest it on your knee, and you bite the end and pluck the string. You use your mouth as the resonating chamber, like the body of the guitar, or in this case, the gourd, to play music. You sing along while you're playing that, and you can actually bend the bow with your two hands as you're playing, and it changes the tone. It lets you play different notes. Now, for this version, I'm using the gourd as my resonating chamber to be nice to my teeth. But this, like the flute, gives us some interesting options. Now, this combines a couple of neat things. The gourd gives us a good bit of percussion. The string gives us a good sound. So I can use this sort of like a percussion instrument where Now I started singing along with that. You know, you get the idea. But because the bow is flexible, I can actually use it very much like a modern guitar. Now, it was pretty rough, but hopefully you get the idea there. Mary had a little gourd. Now again, instruments like this show up in a lot of places, and this is made entirely of Stone Age materials. The string is animal sinew. It's the same kind of stuff that I use to sew much of my clothing and my shoes together. It's made from tendon, usually from the back legs or along the spine of animals like deer or cattle. Of course, a large gourd for a resonating chamber, just hollow it out, pull the seeds out, and throw them out where they're going to grow new gourds. The bow is literally just a stick off of an ash tree, bent to shape. And there's a little bit of beeswax on the sinew here to help keep all the fibers tight together, because it gets actually a lot of stress stretched out and plucked constantly on the bow. And of course, our ancestors would have been able to get beeswax. They just would have had to be quick and careful about it, because the bees usually want to hold on to that stuff. Now, if this was on the floor of a cave for 40,000 years, there would be nothing left, no evidence. We have no idea how old this kind of instrument is, but they go back at least 5,000 years. Early Egyptian and ancient Greek instruments like this existed. Sort of a very fancy version that was common in Bronze Age Greece is what we call a lyra. It looks like a harp, almost like bullhorns, with strings strung between, and then the resonance chamber, the wooden box version of the gourd underneath. They're very pretty instruments. Oh, another string instrument that doesn't give us quite the same range of musical notes, but is really, really neat, and we do find ancient forms of, is what we call a bull roarer. This particular one is based on, measurement-wise anyway, based on an actual artifact. It's about 15,000 years old. It was carved out of caribou antler, which unfortunately I haven't been able to get my hands on extra caribou antler, but one of these days we'll be making an exact replica to compare the sound. This one's made of wood. The original was ornately carved with a cross-hatched pattern, making it look like it was a woven basket. And it was painted red with red ochre, like my woolly mammoths on my headband. Now the way this works is I would take this and swing it around on the end of our long string here. And as it's swinging around, the paddle is twirling. Now that twirling action vibrates the string, which is held taut by the weight of the paddle as I'm swinging it, and it produces a very unique sound. Now, a warning comes with this, because this is a very easy instrument to make. I actually had school kids come from previous programs with a ruler tied to their shoelace, swing it around, and it works. They're really excited about it. But this is an outside musical instrument. The string that I'm using on this is leather. It's what we call brain tanned buckskin. It's the same stuff I make my clothing out of, and it's very, very strong. It's probably about 80, 85 pound test. I can't actually break it with my hands. But what's more important than that is it doesn't untwist, no matter what direction I turn it. When I was first learning how to make the bull roarer, I used string like this. Now, this is twine, and one direction, if I twist that twine, it will unravel. So what happens, I tie my paddle to the end of it, I start swinging it around, and The pedal starts to twirl and vibrates the string. It makes a really good sound. It's twisting that twist in the string tighter and thinking, hey, this is great. So I start swinging it harder, see if I can get it louder. And there's a pause because it gets to a point where the string is as twisted up as it can get. Then the paddle starts to twirl the other direction. Well, the sound starts to change and get a little funny because that twine is untwisting. And on a longer piece of twine, you have areas where ends are overlapped and that string unraveled. The paddle flew across the living room and broke a lamp. Cave Wife told me to play outside. So outside musical instrument, make sure you have string that cannot untwist. If all you have is string that you can untwist, you can braid it together. And once it's braided, it won't untwist, then it'll work. But outside, watch out for little brothers and sisters, you know, neighbors, cats and dogs, cars driving by, airplanes overhead, you know, be careful. Now, because I am inside here in the museum. In the Ice Age section, we have rhinoceroses and saber-toothed cats and woolly mammoths and giant ground sloths surrounding me here. I can't play this one inside, but to hopefully give you an idea of what this sounds like, I'm pretty sure our microphone will pick this up. I have an indoor version of our bull roarer. So you can see how it works without breaking any of our fossils. So give this a little spin and hopefully you can hear that. It gives off this little tiny one gives off a little buzz. It sounds like a bumblebee. There are absolutely videos all over YouTube of bull roarers in action. So if you're curious what they sound like, you can find it there. Or the second Crocodile Dundee movie has a good bull roarer sound. Now, what's interesting about that movie is they're using the bull roarer as a means of communication over distance to signal. Now, I've taken the larger bull roarers that I've made out into the real world and I've tested that. And after about 100 to 150 yards, you just can't hear the sound that it makes out in the open. A larger, different shape, different material bull roarer might make a better sound for that. I just haven't been able to come up with one that produces sound I can use to communicate over distance. But this does produce such a sound. Now, this is a common musical instrument, goes back a very long way. It is a large seashell from a saltwater snail called a conch. Now, if we look here, the tip of that has been ground off so that there is a mouthpiece. Now, the shell itself is hollow all the way throughout that spiral. If I was to uncurl this whole thing, it would be a couple feet long. If I blow through that, like blowing through the flute, say, nothing happens because there's no vibration. Now, if I buzz my lips into here, we can get a really nice tone. I'll see if I can do it right here. I haven't practiced my conch shell trumpet in a little while. That is because that buzzing sound is able to resonate, is able to echo through that tube, through that spiral before it comes out of the end. Makes a really good sound that carries a long distance. Now, of course, Ice Age ancestors don't necessarily have access to tropical seashells. What they do have access to are horns. Now, these are cow horns from a fairly large cow, moo. But like the conch shell, they're long and they're hollow, and they grow that way. To make this into a musical instrument, all I have to do is carve off the tip, clean up the end of it a little bit and use it the same way. Now, I will say, the first time I did that was an experiment that didn't work. Remember, experimental archaeology, experiment, a way to test a theory, a way to test something. Sometimes experiments don't work. So if you are making some of this stuff or giving it a try and it doesn't work, don't be discouraged. Now, this, you can see the end was carved, flattened off and drilled out. Back end was cut nice and smooth. It's got a nice color to it. Cave Wife calls this one the fart horn. Believe it or not, that's not the sound I wanted to get out of this when I was trying to make it. What I found out is that I made it too short. You can see the larger one here, it's several inches longer. And that makes all the difference, making a horn like this. I can tell I've been buzzing my lips, it's trying to get numb. But you can hear it's a good sound. Now, I am sure that some of you probably don't happen to have a spare pile of active horns or buffalo horns just lying around that you can use to make into your own Stone Age horn. So, for our last musical instrument here, I want to show you something that is, well, very modern, but that you can do at home. All you need is a pair of scissors, maybe some help from mom and dad, and a straw. This is just a simple, regular fast food restaurant straw. Right? If I blow through it, nothing happens, right? It's just a soda straw. Now, if I take my scissors, I've seen people do this with their teeth. My teeth don't like this, so I'm going to use the scissors to flatten this end out. And you only have to flatten a little bit of it out. It doesn't have to be more than 1/2 to 3/4 of an inch, and it doesn't have to be perfect. You just want it a little bit squished, a little bit flattened out. We're going to take our scissors and actually trim it, now that it's flat, as even as we can. It doesn't have to be perfect, but even as we can, so that we get the shape of a duckbill. Now, when we blow on that, we've got it flat enough. Those two flaps of straw are going to click against each other. They're going to make noise. Now, that didn't sound great. So there's two things we can do. The tricky one is to actually take the tip of your scissors and very carefully cut out a diamond-shaped hole. That allows you to change the tone, just like the flute. The easy option is, of course, to just cut your straw to a shorter length, or use a shorter straw. And that gives you a different sound still. Now, what's nice about doing it that way, we hold the end of our hand over it, not completely closed like we're making a fist, but kind of open so you can see through. You'll hold the straw and the end of that, and then can actually use your hand to change the tone, to change the sound of that instrument. Somebody's walking by outside the museum going, what in the world is that? Now, what's really fun about this, if you get one just right, you can actually confuse ducks. I have had one of these work well enough that ducks will start quacking back and actually walk over to where I am in the park to try and figure out what that weird looking duck is talking about. It'd be a lot of fun. It is just a simple straw, flattened on the end and trimmed to shape. It can be a lot of fun. Now, I know we are getting close to the end of the program here. I've heard my my alarm going here. Does anybody have any questions about any of the things we've talked about today, any of the instruments or any of it you'd like to see close up again to the camera before we finish up for today? All right, well, yeah, go ahead.
What about didgeridoo?
So a didgeridoo is absolutely an ancient instrument. It's a very good question. Didgeridoo, of course, we know from Australia. It is actually kind of similar to the horns and the conch shells in the way it's played. It's played by buzzing your lips. I do not have one. I have been trying very hard to find the right piece of wood to make one. Now, the Australian Aborigines, to make a didgeridoo, they find a specific type of tree that grows hollow. And they go and they look for the right size, the right shape, and they harvest that and clean it up. They actually decorate them. They paint and color them with stuff like this that's very personalized to the player. And they use those as a very unique sound in their music. Instruments like that probably were very common and used in many other places, though we only seem to really know them from Australia. I have had the opportunity to try playing a didgeridoo, and it takes a lot of practice. I'm not really good at it, but they're a fascinating musical instrument. I'm hoping to add it to my music selection here. But like I said, I haven't been able to find a good piece of wood to build one yet. I might have to go to Australia. Great question. All right. Thank you. Yeah, go ahead.
What, have you seen anything like that? We were wondering if that was like last time where you're starting a fire.
Could it play?
Just hold it still.
Okay. I have seen stuff like that. So stuff like that can occur naturally for a couple of reasons. That one would be a little bit large for starting a fire, but you could make it work if you were in a pinch. The fire starting stones that we usually find are smaller. Now the depression in this one happened naturally. What happens is, especially in a river where you've got current, as rock gets eroded away from sand and water washing over it, you can get a soft spot in the rock. Imagine like a bubble of different material that formed in the rock. That will erode out faster than the surrounding stone as it's being washed away, and you get that sort of bowl-shaped depression. If it was made by somebody on purpose, it's a little hard to see because it's been polished. This one on the inside, you can see it has a rough texture to it. Usually they're made by somebody actually taking a rock and doing what's called pecking and grinding, where they'll actually hit the rock over and over and over to chip out a depression, and it leaves a very unique texture on the inside of it. A piece like that, I would tend to lean toward being naturally made. But it's still a really neat stone. So, did you have another question? Yeah, go ahead.
No, I find lots of shiny rocks, and you can actually make them with fire. And I told Dad that, and then
Okay.
I wish when I get older, I was going to rub 2 white rocks together and make fire with him.
Hey, if you find the right pair of rocks, you can do it. Just keep experimenting. If you get it to work, it's a really great skill to have. Now, like this particular stone, I've been carrying that with me for 12 years. Once you find that right type of rock to get what you want, hang on to it. Good luck. I hope you find it. If you find it, let me know where you found it so I can find one too. All right. Well, I want to thank everybody for joining me here at the museum today. Thanks for the great questions. I hope that you learned at least a little bit about some of where our musical customs and musical instruments came from and enjoyed the program. Like I mentioned, next week's program is going to be ancient fishing. We're going to be talking about how our ancestors added some surf to their turf. Really neat stuff. It's actually a lot of fun. And again, a lot of tools, a lot of things that you can go out and make and try and experiment with on your own time. So thanks again for joining us here at Colossal Fossils. We look forward to seeing you next week. Bye, everybody.